Winter always arrived quietly on our side of the valley. No warning. No shift in the air. Just a thin layer of white on the windowsill when I woke, like someone had brushed a cold hand across the house while I slept. That night, the first night of the season, I lit the candle. Its flame rose slow, stretching itself like it had just woken from a long dream. I placed it in the front window, angled toward the woods where the tree line began its dark work of swallowing the horizon. The flame flickered twice. Not from the draft. Not from my breath. But like it was reacting to something just beyond the glass, something already watching. Winters used to feel gentler when Daniel was alive. He'd sit near the fireplace with his boots off, rubbing warmth back into his hands, telling me how snow always made him feel closer to the earth. I never understood what he meant, but I pretended to. After he disappeared in that river, winter changed shape. It wasn't a season anymore. It was a reminder. Every year, on this night, I lit the candle the same way my mother taught me, steady hands, quiet breath, wick turned toward the woods. She used to say candles spoke a language older than prayer. That flames carried grief the way trees carried rings. Tonight, though, the flame didn't feel like a comfort. It felt like a question. The house was too still. The kind of stillness that presses against your back like a palm. I found myself turning around more than once, expecting to catch someone standing there, someone patient, familiar, silent. But each time, nothing. Only the hum of the heater. The soft crack of settling wood. And the faint hiss of snow touching the roof. I tried to ignore the feeling and moved through the living room, folding blankets, straightening books, pretending the quiet didn't bother me. But silence has a way of revealing what it wants you to hear. It happened when I bent to pick up an old sweater from the rug. That pressure, the one I'd been trying to ignore, shifted. Moved. Like footsteps behind me that didn't break the floorboards, but still changed the air. My breath caught. I didn't turn around right away. Sometimes the mind makes ghosts out of memory, especially in winter. But when I finally did turn, slow as a hinge stiff with age, the room behind me was exactly as it should be. Empty. I exhaled, small and shaky, and set the sweater over the arm of the couch. Then the candle flickered again. Hard this time. Like something had brushed past it. I walked toward the window, careful not to disturb the heat line rising from the flame. Outside, the woods were quiet. Dark. The kind of dark that doesn't give anything back when you look at it. And yet, I felt watched. Not in a threatening way. Not even in a curious way. It felt familiar. As if someone who used to know the rhythm of my days was standing just beyond the tree line, waiting for me to remember something important. A soft sound cut through the stillness. Thud. Not loud. Not sharp. Just enough to break the breath of winter. It came from the porch. I hesitated at the door, my hand resting on the cold brass handle. It felt foolish to be afraid in my own home. But grief rearranges fear. It makes familiar places feel haunted by things we can't name. I opened the door anyway. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to bite the inside of my nose. The porch was empty. The railing, the rocking chair, the old boots Daniel used to leave out there, all still exactly where I left them. Nothing had fallen. Nothing had moved. But the snow didn't lie. There, right at the edge of the steps, were footprints. Soft, deep, recent. I stepped closer, pulling my sweater tight around my arms. The prints were large, the size of a grown man's. Not smudged by melting. Not softened by time. Fresh. I followed their shape with my eyes, and the trail curved, not toward the road, which would have made sense, but toward the woods. Into that dark place where the candle's light barely reached. My throat tightened. For 11 winters, no one had walked up to this house. No one had climbed these steps. No one had stood this close. If someone had knocked, I would have heard it. If someone had walked away, I would have heard that too. But I'd heard nothing. Only that soft, strange thud. I looked back at the house, at the warm glow of the candle in the window. The flame leaned toward me, like it was trying to tell me something. I stood there for a long while, half on the porch, half in the night, my breath rising into the cold like pieces of a question I wasn't ready to ask. The footprints dragged my gaze back to the trees. They disappeared into the shadows, swallowed by the place where sound went missing the night Daniel did. Snow fell quietly around me, settling into my hair, my sleeves, the creases of my palms. I thought about going inside. Closing the door. Pretending I hadn't seen anything. But the woods didn't move. Didn't shift. Didn't even breathe. They just waited. And I found myself whispering into the cold, not sure who I was speaking to anymore. Who walked up to my door, if no one knocked? Morning came softly, the kind of pale blue light that makes everything look a little unfinished. The snow outside my window sat undisturbed, smooth as fabric, except for one thing. Footprints. Again. Not a straight path this time. They curved around the house, slow, careful, like someone had taken their time studying each window, each door, each shadow. I stood there with the curtain gathered in my hand, the cold from the glass seeping into my fingers, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear exactly. Not yet. Just the sense that someone knew my morning routine better than I did. I stepped outside with my boots half-laced, the breath leaving my mouth in soft little clouds. The prints were crisp, clean-edged, untouched by wind. Whoever made them walked with intention, heels deep, toes light, like they were trying not to disturb anything more than necessary. They circled the house once, then again, then disappeared into the woods as neatly as if the trees had swallowed them. I crouched beside one, brushing snow away with my glove. The size was familiar. Too familiar. Enough to pull Daniel's memory up from the part of my mind where I'd stored it away, quiet and folded like an old letter. I tried to shake it off, but memories have a habit of rising when the world goes still. Mrs. Fenton knocked around mid-morning, her little wool hat pulled too low over her eyebrows. She didn't step inside, just hovered at the threshold like she wasn't sure she should bring her words indoors. "I thought I saw someone," she said. "By your place. Early. Maybe an hour before the sun." Her voice had the tremble of someone who's afraid they are telling on themselves. "A man," she added, eyes drifting toward the woods. "Tall." I asked if she recognized him, but she shook her head before I even finished the question, quick, nervous, like the idea alone unsettled her. She didn't stay long. People rarely do when the truth feels too close to the skin. Inside, the house felt different. Not wrong. Not violated. Just rearranged. Subtle things at first. A chair angled a few inches away from the table. The coat I'd tossed over the banister last night, now neatly folded in a way I hadn't folded anything since Daniel was the one doing it. The curtains tied back, though I didn't remember touching them. All small enough to question my memory. But I've lived alone too long to forget what I do and don't do. And these changes felt like habits. Like someone moving through the space the way they always had. For a moment, the air held a scent, faint, clean, familiar. Pine soap. The kind Daniel used because he said anything else felt too sweet. I stood still, not breathing, letting the house speak. Silence has a texture. That morning, it felt thick. Crowded. Occupied. I walked room to room, touching objects lightly with my fingertips, as if confirming they still belonged to me. The living room window held the outline of my candle on the sill, and I felt a pulse of something in my chest. Not grief. Not longing. Recognition. I don't know how long I stood there before I realized the daylight had begun to fade around the edges of the house, slipping into that quiet blue that always comes before night. I lit the candle a little earlier than usual. And I let it burn longer. Its glow stretched across the room like a soft, living thing, reaching places the sun no longer touched. I watched it flicker, rising and falling with a rhythm that felt almost conversational. Something in me wanted to believe it was a comfort. Something else wasn't so sure. Later, when the wind settled and the woods fell into their night stillness, I walked back to the window. I didn't know why I looked. Maybe curiosity. Maybe habit. Maybe something deeper I didn't want to name. And there he was. A tall figure standing just beyond the tree line, far enough that the shadows held most of him, close enough that I could see he wasn't moving. Not a shift of weight. Not a tilt of the head. Not even the lift of breath. Just watching. The candle flickered hard, its flame bending toward the glass as if reaching for him, or recoiling from him. I couldn't tell. I froze with my hand resting on the windowsill, the wood cool beneath my palm. The figure didn't step forward. Didn't step back. He simply existed there, like he had every right to. As if he were waiting. Not to come inside. But to be invited. I stood there until my eyes watered from staring too long. The woods behind him looked darker than night, like his presence had soaked the light out of the trees. Snow drifted softly around him, catching on his shoulders, clinging to him like he was something solid. Something real. But the stillness, the perfect, unnatural stillness, made my chest tighten. After a long moment, he turned. Not abruptly. Not with purpose. Just a quiet pivot toward the deeper woods. And then he was gone. The candle steadied itself, its flame rising tall and calm again, like it had been holding its breath the whole time. I touched the glass, letting the cold bite my fingerprints into it. Who stands in the shadows of a house they never knocked on? As if they already know their way home. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the soft crackle of the candle burning in the window. Winter had a way of holding its breath around my home, like the snow itself was listening. I was halfway down the hallway when it happened. 3 slow knocks. Not loud. Not hurried. Just deliberate. The kind of knock that knows the house. Knows the rhythm of its wood. Knows the woman inside well enough to wait. My feet stopped before my mind did. And in that stillness, something old inside me rose, something I thought the river had carried away years ago. It felt like muscle memory, the ghost of a life I had already buried. I stood near the door for a long time, my hand suspended just above the handle. The winter air pressed against the windows, humming softly, making the candle flame sway. Its glow stretched across the floorboards like a trembling path leading straight to the threshold. 3 knocks. No more. No less. Daniel used to knock like that, soft, spaced out, almost apologetic. He used to say he didn't want to startle me after a long day, so he made sure his arrival felt like a question instead of a demand. I tried to remind myself it couldn't be him. Couldn't. People don't come back from rivers. But my body didn't listen. It reacted as though no time had passed, shoulders straightening, heart lifting, breath catching in a place that felt too tender to touch. Something about the silence on the other side of the door unnerved me. No shuffling. No footsteps fading away. Just someone standing there, waiting for me to break the moment. I pressed my palm to the wood. It felt cold, but not empty. And as the candle flickered, bending forward like it felt a pull I couldn't see, I turned the knob. The old hinges groaned in a way that always embarrassed me around guests, but the man at the door didn't react. He just stood there, shoulders dusted with snow, the faint outline of the woods clinging to him like a shadow he hadn't escaped. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked like Daniel. Not exactly. Life had taken its swings, edged deeper lines into his face, thinned him out, dimmed something behind the eyes. But if grief had ever sculpted a man's reflection out of memory, this was it. He opened his mouth slightly, like he was trying to form a name. A name I used to hear whispered across pillows. A name spoken through laughter, through arguments, through the soft moments after midnight when the world felt kinder. But he didn't say it. He just breathed out a small cloud of winter air, like the syllables got stuck somewhere between his chest and the cold. I gripped the edge of the door, grounding myself in the grain of the wood. "Can I help you?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. He blinked slowly, as if waking from a long, heavy dream. "I think so," he murmured, though the words sounded unfamiliar in his own mouth. Something inside me tightened. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to be Daniel, or needed him not to be. The candle flickered violently behind me. I felt its warmth shift, leaning toward him like a body recognizing another in the dark. He noticed it too. His eyes followed the flame's motion, and a strange softness crossed his expression, almost like relief. Like he was seeing something he had been searching for. "Your house," he whispered, voice frayed at the edges. "It looks the same." A chill crawled up my spine. "How would you know that?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, not onto the porch, just closer into the lantern of light spilling from my doorway. Up close, I saw details that made my breath falter. The scar just above his eyebrow. The small indentation near his temple. Marks I had touched with my own hands years ago. Marks Daniel had. His gaze drifted to my face, and something flickered behind his eyes, recognition trying to surface through fog. "You look." He paused. "Familiar." The way he said it cracked something inside me. Familiar. Not known. Not loved. Just familiar. As though I were a memory he couldn't place. I took a slow step back, suddenly aware of the doorway, the threshold that stood between a life rebuilt and a past that had never fully died. And still, he didn't move. Not forward. Not away. As if waiting, quietly, patiently, for permission to exist on my porch. Snow began to fall again, drifting onto his shoulders, melting into his hair. He didn't shake it off. He didn't look away. He just stood there, watching me like someone trying to remember a song they once knew by heart. The candle behind me bent closer, its flame trembling, reaching toward him as though drawn by a breath only it could feel. I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" I finally asked. The question hung in the cold, untouched, unanswered. His lips parted. But no name came out. Only a single exhale, warm, fragile, human. For a moment, the world felt impossibly still. Can the living look so much like the dead? Or did the dead sometimes find ways to wear a living man's face? The steam rose between us like a thin veil, drifting in slow, quiet ribbons that never seemed to reach him. The kitchen felt smaller with him sitting there, elbows resting exactly where Daniel's once had. Outside, the winter wind pushed against the windows, asking to be let in. He didn't speak at first. Just breathed, slow, uneven, like each inhale carried a memory he wasn't sure he wanted. And in that stillness, all I could think was how familiar the shape of a man can look in the wrong kind of light. I had forgotten how loud silence could be when shared with someone who shouldn't be here. The clock above the stove ticked, steady and patient, the same rhythm Daniel used to follow when he couldn't sleep. He would sit where this man sat now, tapping his thumb against the table, soft and steady, like a steadying heartbeat. I watched him do it now. Tap. 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 A small sound, but it pinned my breath in my chest. Steam lifted from the 2 cups I'd prepared without thinking. 2 cups. As if muscle memory had taken over long before my mind knew what it was doing. His hands wrapped around his cup, but he didn't drink. His fingers trembled just slightly, like he wasn't used to holding anything warm. He looked older. Not by years, but by winters. By nights spent somewhere cold, beyond walls and beyond names. His hair was darker at the ends, lighter at the roots, as if he'd been walking toward and away from the sun for too long. But his eyes were Daniel's. Soft brown with a shadow behind them, the kind that grows only when someone forgets what home feels like. And still, I didn't trust the way my heart moved toward him. Like it wanted to bridge a gap no one had asked it to close. His voice came slowly, like something thawing. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, fingers tightening around the ceramic. The sound of it, low, rough, familiar, ran down my spine like a memory stepping out of the dark. "I thought you were dead," I whispered before I could stop myself. He lowered his gaze. The steam curled against his cheek, catching the faint scar across his brow, an old cut, healed but jagged, the way Daniel's had been after the fall from the attic ladder years ago. "I should have been," he murmured. "I went into that river. I remember the cold. And after that..." He shook his head softly. "Pieces. Just pieces." His thumb tapped again, slow, rhythmic, the same pattern Daniel used when trying to gather his thoughts. I found myself leaning forward without meaning to. "What do you remember?" I asked. He swallowed, throat working like each word scraped its way out. "Your singing," he whispered. "That song you loved, the one about the tree by the water." His eyes lifted, searching mine. "You used to sing it when you cooked. Always a little off-key." A laugh escaped me, small, shaky, the kind that hurts more than crying. "That was a long time ago," I said. He nodded, lips pressing together like my voice brought something back he wasn't sure he should hold. "It's the clearest thing I have," he said. "You, in that blue apron. Stirring something. Humming." My hand tightened to a fist beneath the table. Such a small detail. Too small to be coincidence. Or maybe too perfect. "So, the night you fell," I said quietly. "The night everything changed, what happened?" He froze. It wasn't dramatic. Just a pause. But it stretched long enough to feel unnatural, like the room itself had stopped moving. His thumb stopped tapping. The steam slowed. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. He began. His voice cracked, thin around the edges. "I remember the water. I remember the dark. I remember someone calling my name. But before that..." I pressed. My voice was careful, almost gentle. I need to know how you slipped. How you ended up in the river. You told me once you were fine before it happened. His eyes flickered, just a flash, like he was choosing between truths. Or fabricating one. I don't remember the moment, he said. Too slow. Too rehearsed. Everything else comes back in pieces, but that, it's just gone. You don't remember the fall, I said. Or how you got to the river. He shook his head. But you remember my favorite song. He flinched, barely, but I saw it. I told you, he whispered. Some things stay. He lifted the cup to his lips, pretending to drink, but his hands were shaking now. A fine, fragile tremor. And suddenly, the kitchen felt colder. Not because of the winter outside, but because there is a particular kind of chill that comes when a truth is almost close enough to touch. Something about him was Daniel. Every quiet habit, every soft tilt of the voice. But something else. Something deeper. Did not belong to the man I buried in my heart. He looked around the kitchen as if trying to stitch himself into it, into this life, into my memory. The steam between us had thinned to nothing, leaving the air too clear, too exposed. I want to remember, he whispered. The words trembled, landing gently between us. I want to fill in the parts that are missing. I nodded. But my hand stayed in my lap. Still. Cold. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows again, 3 soft taps, like a reminder of the night he returned. He met my eyes. For the first time fully. In his gaze, I saw Daniel. And I saw a stranger. Both waiting for me to decide who I believed was sitting in my kitchen. And the candle on the counter flickered once, leaning toward him. As if it already knew. He spoke of his missing years the way someone recalls a dream after waking, slowly, carefully, as if too much pressure might make the whole thing crumble. Fragments. Always fragments. A fisherman's lantern cutting through fog. A coastline he couldn't name. Winter spent wandering, sleeping in places that didn't belong to him. His voice barely rose above the hum of the refrigerator. The house listened the way I did, quiet, cautious, leaning just a little too far forward. But every time he paused, it felt less like he was remembering. And more like he was choosing. And that was what frightened me most. The next morning, I found him standing by the kitchen window, watching the frost crawl across the glass. He didn't turn when I entered. Just said, softly, "Cold came earlier this year." A harmless comment, one Daniel used to say almost every November. I made coffee for 2 again. Not because he asked, but because my hands seemed to know the routine better than my mind did. He wrapped both hands around the cup, warming his fingers. They said I washed up near a cove, he murmured. Small town, friendly, I think. I stayed with people who didn't ask questions. He paused, eyes drifting somewhere far beyond the window pane. But I don't remember their names. A soft ache tightened in my chest. It wasn't what he remembered that unsettled me. It was what he didn't. Later, when he rested in the living room, I sat on the floor with old newspapers spread around me. Articles about missing men, river accidents, rescues from years ago. But nothing, not a single line, matched his story. Hospitals gave me the same answer. No records. No admissions. Not under that name. As if he had slipped through the world unnoticed. And yet, when I stood to leave, I noticed the blanket folded on the back of the couch. Folded the way Daniel used to do it. Edges aligned. Corners tucked. Precise. Too precise. As the days passed, he moved through the house like someone returning to a place their body remembered before their mind did. He opened drawers without hesitation, reached for the jar of matches above the stove, knew exactly which cupboard held the tea, the honey, the small chipped bowl Daniel once refused to throw away. I watched him from the doorway as he walked down the hall, hesitant, unsure, but drawn forward by some invisible thread. His fingers brushed the wall, trailing lightly over the paint, the way Daniel used to when checking for uneven plaster. When he reached my bedroom, he stopped. He didn't step inside. Just stood in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame. His eyes softened. Not with nostalgia, something heavier. Something quieter. "I remember this," he whispered. Barely a breath. Barely a sound. My pulse stuttered. "How?" I asked. He swallowed, shoulders tightening as though bracing for a truth he didn't want to tell. "I don't know," he said. But his hand slid down the doorframe in the exact place Daniel used to rest his palm when watching me fold laundry. Something inside me twisted sharply, fear and longing bound together in one impossible knot. A man doesn't guess the intimate geography of a home. He learns it, lives it, loves it. So how did he know? That evening, after he went to shower, I pulled out the box of old documents I'd avoided for years. Marriage license. Insurance forms. Daniel's handwriting looping through old notes. I laid them out across the table, my fingers trembling as I searched for anything, that might anchor the man in my house to the world he claimed he'd lived in. When he returned, hair damp, wearing the flannel shirt I'd found for him from the old closet, he paused at the doorway. "What's all this?" he asked. "Proof," I said quietly. "Of who you were. Of what happened." He stepped closer, eyes scanning the documents like they belonged to someone else. "I tried," I whispered. "I called hospitals. Searched records. Looked through old articles." He didn't meet my eyes. "There's nothing. No fisherman. No town. No rescue. No trace of a man who should have been found." He inhaled slowly, the breath shaky. "You think I'm lying?" The way he said it, soft, wounded, made something fragile inside me shift. "I don't know what to think," I said. "But you remember too much, and not enough." His hands curled at his sides. "I remember pieces," he said. "Flashes. Moments." He touched the scar on his brow. "Pain. And the house," I whispered. "The drawers. The blanket. The bedroom. Daniel's bedroom. Why do those memories come back so easily?" He looked up at me. Finally. Fully. "I don't know," he said, but there was something behind his eyes, fear or guilt or longing, that made my skin tighten. "Sometimes," he added, voice barely a breath, "it feels like I lived here once. Before everything went dark." That night, after he'd gone to bed in the guest room, I stood in the hallway, staring at the faint line of light under his door. For a moment, his shadow shifted, slow, deliberate, moving the way Daniel once did when pacing through insomnia. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady the quiet storm building there. A man with no records. No name that survived. No past he could prove. Yet he walked through my home like he was following invisible footprints, ones only he could see. And when I finally turned, the bedroom door behind me creaked softly, the way it always did when Daniel would push it open at night. A sound my body remembered instantly. A sound he should not have known. But maybe he did. Some houses settle with age. Mine started shifting the moment he walked back into it. At first, it was small things, lights flickering when he passed under them, as though they needed a moment to recognize him. Then the candle, the one I kept by the window each winter, began to flare whenever his eyes lingered on it. Not brighter, not warmer, just alive in a way that made my skin prickle. He moved through the rooms like someone reacquainting himself with old ghosts. But it wasn't the house that felt haunted. It was him. And I was beginning to understand that even shadows can pretend to be familiar. He stayed longer than either of us planned. Or maybe he planned it all along, drifting quietly from one room to the next, fitting himself back into the spaces Daniel once touched. Every morning, I woke to the faint sound of the front door closing just before dawn. By the time I made coffee, he'd be returning from the woods, boots damp, breath steady, eyes unreadable. "What do you look for out there?" I asked once. He paused, one hand on the back of the dining chair. "Not what," he murmured. "Who?" Then he gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Around him, the house behaved differently. Light bulbs buzzed, shadows stretched just a little longer. And sometimes, when he stood near the candle, its flame leaned toward him, as if recognizing a missing breath. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Grief can make strange shapes out of the familiar. Loneliness, too. But that didn't explain the way he avoided his reflection. The bathroom mirror stayed fogged long after he'd walked away, as though even the steam hesitated to show his face. And it didn't explain why, on some nights, the floorboards in the hallway creaked as if someone stood just outside my door, waiting for permission to enter. Mrs. Fenton stopped by one afternoon, bundled in her red coat, her expression tight with worry. "I shouldn't say anything," she whispered, even though she already had. "But last night, around 2, I heard a voice outside your window." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of voice?" "Low," she said. "Too low. Like a prayer or someone remembering something out loud." She wrung her hands, breath forming small clouds in the cold. "I thought it might be that man. The one who looks like Daniel." When I asked if she understood what he was saying, she shook her head. "It wasn't English," she whispered. "Or maybe it was. Just wrong somehow." I thanked her, but my hands trembled around the doorframe long after she left. That evening, I found him sitting on the edge of the couch, the candlelight reflecting softly across his face. He was watching the flame like someone trying to decode its thoughts. "You went walking early today," I said. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the flickering light. "It's quiet in the woods. What do you hear out there?" The question slipped out before I could rethink it. His thumb tapped softly against his knee. "Everything," he said. Then nothing more. By the 5th night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something neither of us had named. I found him standing in the hallway, half-shadowed, his face turned slightly upward like he was listening to something only he could hear. "Were you outside my window last night?" I asked. He didn't flinch. Didn't turn. Instead, he gave a soft smile, gentle, almost affectionate. But it did nothing to comfort me. "I walk," he said calmly. "That's all." That's not an answer. He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes were dark in a way Daniel's never were, quiet, bottomless, carrying something deep and unspoken. "You call me Daniel," he murmured. Not accusing. Not disappointed. Almost relieved. "I call you what you told me to call you." He stepped forward, the shadows pulling with him like threads. "When you say my name," he whispered, It feels like I'm supposed to be here. The room tilted inside my chest. Supposed to be, I repeated. Or want to be. His smile faltered. For a moment, just a moment, something cracked behind his eyes. Like he knew the answer but couldn't bear the weight of it. I don't always remember the woods, he said. Or the river. Or the cold. He swallowed, voice trembling at the edges. But I remember you. The candle behind him flickered sharply, bending toward his back as if drawn to its own source of heat. I took a slow breath. Why do you look relieved? I whispered, every time I say your name. He exhaled shakily. As if I'm returning, he said. Piece by piece. Later that night, after he'd gone to the guest room, I walked through the house in the dark, not to check windows or doors, but to steady myself. The candle on the windowsill was still burning, flame tall and strangely steady. Outside, the woods were silent. Still. Waiting. I stepped closer to the glass, watching the reflection of the room behind me. Two shapes stood there, mine, small and pale, and behind it, another. Just a shimmer. A suggestion. A shadow the shape of a man who shouldn't be here. I blinked, and it was gone. But the candle beside me bent again, tilting toward the guest room where he slept. And I felt it, deep in my bones. Whatever he was returning from. He wasn't finished yet. The river was quieter than I remembered. Snow bent the reeds, and the wind kept brushing the surface like it was trying to wake something sleeping underneath. I stood at the bank with Daniel's old photograph in my hand, the one taken before the accident, before everything broke. The cold crawled up my sleeves, but I didn't move. Some places don't let you breathe until they are done watching you. The water looked ordinary. Almost gentle. But I kept thinking, if it took him once, why did it let him go so easily the second time? I walked along the edge where his body was supposed to have drifted down. Snow softened the world, made every sound smaller, even my own thoughts. The sky hung low, heavy with that grey-bluish light winter keeps, just for places where people have cried before. Daniel always hated the cold. The thought made my chest fold in on itself. A few fishermen were scattered farther down, bundled in layers, their lines disappearing into the dark water. I held the photograph a little tighter, feeling the creases where I'd touched it too many times. His face looked younger there. Softer around the eyes. Alive in a way the man in my house somehow wasn't. When I reached the bend where the river curved like a bent elbow, a man in a thick wool hat glanced up at me. He looked like he'd been part of this landscape for years, someone the river spoke to more than the people around him. You lost? He asked, voice carried by the wind. I shook my head and held the picture out. I'm looking for someone who once drowned here. He studied it longer than I expected. The snow kept falling around us, soft, steady, uncaring. Then he exhaled, like something old finally loosened in him. I seen him, he said. But that ain't the man who walked out of this river. The words didn't hit all at once. They slid in, quiet and slow, like the cold settling beneath my coat. What do you mean? I asked. He tapped the photograph with one gloved finger. The one I saw was shorter. Younger by at least 10 years. And he limped on his right leg. Never seen that face, though. He nodded toward the picture. Not once. I felt the river behind me, listening again. You're sure? My voice barely held. As sure as I know the sound of this water. He paused, eyes drifting to the far bank. Some folks go missing here. Some come back wrong. He said it simply, like stating the weather. I thanked him because I didn't know what else to do. He nodded once and went back to his line. On the walk home, the snow didn't feel soft anymore. It sounded sharp under my boots, each crunch too loud in the quiet. I tried to imagine a man younger than Daniel, limping, walking out of this river with a name that wasn't his. When I reached the house, I went straight to the guest room, his room, though he never called it that. I opened drawers I'd never opened before. Looked beneath folded shirts that still smelled faintly of cedar. Checked the lining of his coat pockets. Nothing. No ID. No hospital scars. No marks from the accident that should have been carved into him forever. Just empty space where a life should have been. I sat on the edge of the bed, the air heavy with silence. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comforts you. It was the kind that gathers in corners, waiting to be seen. His boots sat by the door, mud dried on the soles, older mud, darker than anything near our home. His jacket hung neatly over the chair, like he knew I'd be searching but didn't mind. Or maybe, didn't think I'd find anything at all. My fingers brushed the candle on the nightstand. He always insisted I light it at dusk. He always watched the flame too closely. I struck a match. The sound was small, but it filled the room. As the candlewick caught, I felt a presence behind me, not touching, not even close enough for warmth, but close enough for the air to shift. I didn't turn. I just whispered, "Daniel, why were you at that river?" Silence. Not the hesitant kind. The knowing kind. I finally looked over my shoulder. He stood there, face calm, almost gentle, eyes reflecting the flame in a way that didn't look like reflection at all. More like the light belonged to him. "You were gone a long time," I murmured. His lips curved, not a smile, not exactly. Something thinner. "Some journeys take longer coming back," he said. The candle flickered, stretching his shadow across the wall. And for the first time, I noticed it didn't move when he did. I turned back to the flame, willing my breath to steady, but the truth kept rising, soft and cold. The fisherman's words. The empty drawers. The face behind me that wore my husband's shape too perfectly. The river didn't return him. It returned something that learned him. The room dimmed around us, and the candle leaned into its own light, as though trying to escape the shadow behind me. I felt him watching, not with fear, not with malice, but with a quiet understanding that made my skin tighten. "What did the river give me?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The flame bent sideways, as if pulled by breath that wasn't mine. The dust in the study rose, like slow-moving smoke every time I touched a book. Morning light came through the curtains in thin, tired lines, striping the desk where Daniel used to sit. The room felt untouched, as though his absence had pressed itself into the furniture, telling everything to stay still. I wasn't looking for secrets. Just wiping shelves. Folding papers. Trying to keep the house from swallowing itself in memory. But the drawer stuck halfway, caught on something soft, something that shouldn't have been there. When I pulled it open, the smell of old paper lifted into the air. And I saw an envelope with Daniel's handwriting on it. At first, I thought it was just another bill, or some forgotten receipt he tucked away before the accident. Something dull. Something ordinary. But the edges of the envelope were worn like it had been handled often, maybe with fear or hesitation. Daniel always pressed too hard with his pen. His name could cut the paper when he was nervous. And there it was again, his heavy script, slanted, uneven. My chest tightened before I even picked it up. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway tick in pairs, one soft, one sharp. Like a heartbeat stumbling. I slipped my thumb beneath the flap. The paper inside was folded twice, careful but trembling. As though he wrote it in one breath, stopped, then tried again. The date on top froze me. It was written 3 weeks before the river took him. I think someone is following me, the first line read. The handwriting dipped lower, as though he couldn't steady his hand. My vision wavered, just for a moment. He had never told me this. Not once. The next line wasn't better. I'm leaving something for you. Just in case. The paper crinkled as I opened it fully. And halfway down, the world inside the study stopped. If anything happens to me, don't trust the face that returns. My breath didn't move. My body didn't move. Only my eyes kept reading the sentence again, looking for a different meaning that wasn't there. A small brass key fell out of the envelope and hit the wooden floor with a soft metallic tap. It spun once before resting near my shoe, as though waiting for me to claim a secret I didn't want. My fingers shook when I picked it up. Old. Cold. Not from any door in this house. I looked at his writing again, this strange mixture of love and warning. The kind of words a man writes when he knows he's running out of time. And all I could think about was the man who slept down the hall. The one who walked the house like he was remembering it second by second. The one whose shadow didn't always match his movements. The candle on the desk flickered. And then, softly, the floor creaked behind me. I didn't turn. Not yet. I folded the letter quickly, too quickly, sliding the envelope beneath a stack of old notebooks. My breath tried to steady itself, failing. Then I looked up. He was standing in the doorway. He didn't speak at first. He just watched. His face was calm, too calm. A little curious, a little warm, the way Daniel used to look at me when he was trying to read my mood. But there was something else beneath it. Something I couldn't name. Something that shifted too quickly to catch. What are you doing? He asked. His voice was soft. Almost tender. Almost. I forced a smile. I could feel it trembling against my teeth. Just cleaning the study, I said, brushing my hands along the desk as if dusting away guilt. His eyes dipped to the drawer. Then to my hands. And back to my face, like he was taking inventory of everything I wasn't saying. Find anything interesting? He asked. The air tightened between us. I shook my head. No, nothing. He stepped into the room, slow, deliberate, the way you move when approaching an injured animal. The light from the window touched him as he passed through it. And for the briefest moment, his shadow stretched across the desk before snapping back to normal. Too fast. Too wrong. I kept my smile. Held it steady. Even as my heart pressed itself painfully against my ribs. His gaze lingered on me long enough to feel like a hand resting where it shouldn't. Then he nodded once and stepped back out. Not turning his back until he crossed the doorway. When he was gone, the study sank into stillness again. But it didn't feel like the same room. The envelope sat hidden under the notebooks, humming against my awareness. The key lay cold in my palm, its weight far heavier than brass should ever feel. Daniel wrote that letter in fear. He wrote it knowing something was coming for him. Something that might wear his voice, his hands, his smile. I pressed the key into my pocket and closed the drawer gently, as though the wood might scream if I moved too fast. Outside, the wind pushed against the window, rattling it softly. Winter had followed him home. Just like his letter said it would. And suddenly, I didn't know which was more terrifying. The warning he left behind. Or the man who had returned to hear it. The woods were quieter than they should have been. Snow softened every sound until even my breath felt out of place. The key Daniel left in that envelope sat cold in my pocket, tapping lightly against my leg with each careful step, like it was reminding me where it wanted to go. Branches bowed under winter's weight. My boots sank deep, leaving behind a trail that looked too sharp, too bold against the untouched white. Then I saw it, half swallowed by the forest, leaning like it had been tired for years. A cabin. Rotting at the edges. Breathing out cold through broken windows. The key pulsed against my fingers. I knew it would fit. I didn't know what waited inside. The door resisted at first, the swollen wood pushing back like a warning. When it finally gave in, the hinges let out a thin groan that slipped into the trees behind me. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something older, like forgotten years trying to breathe again. Light leaked through cracks in the walls, falling in crooked lines across a small table cluttered with papers. Dust lay thick, except where certain things had been touched recently. Moved. Stuttered. My heart pressed harder against my ribs. I stepped deeper into the room. The floor creaked like it remembered Daniel. A map lay pinned on the wall, rivers and trails drawn in dark pencil strokes, his handwriting looping along the edges. He'd always written like he was in a hurry, as though his thoughts outran his pen. But the photographs scattered across the table, those stopped me cold. Daniel. At different ages. Some I recognized from our life together, hiking trips, summer walks. Others. I didn't. He looked younger in some, older in others. His hair shorter. His stance different. His eyes almost the same, but not exactly. I touched one photograph gently. The dust around it felt disturbed, like someone else had held it not too long ago. I picked up the first stack of papers, careful not to disturb more than I had to. At the top was a journal, Daniel's handwriting on the front cover, the ink smudged from hurried fingers. Inside, his words staggered across the page. I met a man today who looked exactly like me. My breath stalled. He said my name before I gave it. Said we shared blood. Said my mother kept secrets I never learned. I read further, every line shaking loose another piece I thought I knew. He followed me into town. Watched from across the street. He smiled once. Just once. But not with his eyes. My skin prickled in the cold cabin air. Then there were notes, dates, places, sightings. A man with Daniel's face. Walking roads Daniel never traveled. Carrying a limp Daniel never had. Arriving in towns he never mentioned. Daniel's fear soaked through every line. He wants something from me. I don't know what. The last page was scribbled, frantic. He said blood calls to blood. That he found me after years of looking. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. And on the next sheet beneath the journal. A photograph. 2 men. Standing several feet apart. Their faces identical, except for the eyes. My knees nearly gave under me. Daniel had a twin. And never knew. Until that stranger found him. The silence thickened, gathering around me as I flipped through more notes. One caught my eye, a list of dates matching the weeks before Daniel vanished. Shadow at the tree line. Footsteps behind me. Voice calling my name at night. And then the final, unfinished line. If he follows me to the river, I. The sentence stopped. Just ended. Like the pen had been pulled from his hand. A cold draft swept through the cabin. The door creaked, though I hadn't touched it. I swallowed, forcing my breathing to stay quiet. The photographs on the wall fluttered slightly, as if stirred by someone passing behind me, though no one was there. I gathered the journal and the photos, slipping them into my coat. The key felt heavier now, like it knew its job was done. As I stepped outside, the forest seemed to listen. The wind brushed past my ear, low and deliberate. Almost like a whisper. On the walk back, every sound felt doubled, one set of footsteps my own, the other landing just a moment after. I didn't look back. Couldn't. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, the sun had started its slow descent, turning the snow blue and brittle. The house waited in the distance, warm with light. But warmth didn't mean safety anymore. Inside that house was a man with Daniel's face. And I didn't know which brother he was. When I stepped through the front door, the heat wrapped around me too quickly, like the house was trying to claim me before the truth did. He was in the kitchen, standing with his hands resting lightly on the counter. He turned when he heard me, slow, almost gentle. "You were gone a while," he said. I forced a nod. Just needed air. His eyes moved to my coat, then back to my face. That same soft smile. That same too quick shift of expression I could never quite catch. I felt the journal pressing against my ribs, the photographs crinkling with my breath. If the stranger survived the river, if the wrong man found his way out, then the person looking at me now wasn't my husband. And the house suddenly felt far too small. For the both of us. The candle was the only light in the room. A small flame, trembling like it knew what was coming. I remember watching the wax drip down its side, slow and hesitant, the way truth sometimes is. He stood across from me, half in the dark, half in that warm circle of light, and for a moment, I couldn't tell which part of him was real. The house felt too still. Like even the walls were waiting to hear what he'd say. And when it came, it was barely a whisper. But it was enough to break something soft inside me. There had been evenings when this same room felt like a place of comfort. Where the air smelled like cinnamon and old books, and his presence fit easily beside mine. But that night, there was nothing familiar about him. Not the way his shoulders curved inward, not the way he watched the flame instead of me. Even the shadows seemed to pull away from him, like they knew his truth before I did. I kept my hand on the table to steady myself. The wood felt cold, colder than it ever had, and I wondered if maybe I'd been clinging to a story this whole time, not a person. He didn't sit. Didn't move. Just waited, as though he was giving me a chance to run if I wanted to. But I didn't. I only said his name, Daniel, soft, careful, as if saying it too loudly would make it crumble. He lifted his eyes. There was something fragile in them, something tired. And for the first time, I felt it. The distance between us. A quiet, aching gulf filled with all the words he had never said. The candle flickered again, stretching his shadow into strange shapes on the wall, shapes I no longer recognized. "Tell me," I whispered. He didn't blink. Didn't swallow. Just let the truth fall out of him like it had been waiting too long behind his ribs. I needed a home. His voice was steady, but the kind of steady that comes after breaking. A name. A place where someone waited at the door. The flame leaned toward him as if listening. I didn't breathe. I tried, he continued. I tried to be who you thought I was. I thought if I stepped into his name, maybe I could step into his life too. He took one slow step closer. The floor creaked, soft but sharp in the quiet. My hands curled against the table before I even realized. I never meant to hurt you. His eyes shifted, not pleading, not defending. Just exposed. Like he'd finally stopped running from himself. In the warm light, his face looked softer, but not in the way I remembered. There was no familiar smile tugging at the corners. No quiet warmth hiding in his expression. It was a stranger's face. A stranger wearing the memory of someone I once loved. And somehow, that hurt more than any lie. Why him? My voice barely carried across the small room, but he heard it. He heard everything. He lowered his head, and the candlelight slid over him like it, too, was searching for answers. Because Daniel was loved, he said. The words cracked at the edges. People said his name like a blessing. Like he mattered just by being. He looked up then, right at me, and something inside me tightened. I never had that, he said. I never had anyone look at me the way you looked at him. Even before you knew I wasn't him, you loved him through me. The flame snapped, sending a thin shadow across his cheek. It split his face in two, the man I thought I knew, and the truth I was meeting for the first time. I wanted to be worth waiting for, he whispered. I wanted to belong somewhere. I wanted you to see me. Silence filled the spaces between us. Heavy. Unforgiving. My grief rose like a tide I couldn't hold back. Not loud. Not sharp. Just a slow ache spilling through my chest. He took another step, close enough that I could see the tremble in his jaw. But his face, it didn't look like Daniel's anymore. It didn't look like anyone I recognized. And for the first time, I had to face the truth. I had been loving a mirage. The candle flickered wildly then, as if caught between us. Light. Dark. Choosing. I stepped back. Just one small step, but it felt like the floor shifted under me. His breath hitched. Not because I moved, but because he already knew what it meant. I'm sorry, he murmured. And maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. But the apology drifted through the dim room like smoke, thin and disappearing. I looked at him one last time, the face that was never his, the name that never belonged to him, the love that never should have been mine to give. How do I let go of someone who was never real? I didn't expect an answer. The candle sputtered, then steadied. And that small, trembling light was all that kept me standing as the man with no name finally lowered his eyes. The snow fell in slow, soft sheets, blanketing the world in white silence. I held the candle carefully, its small flame trembling against the winter wind. The woods stretched ahead, dark and endless, the trees heavy with frost, their branches bowed like old men hiding secrets. He walked beside me, shoulders hunched against the cold, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. His breath steamed in the air, curling upward and disappearing into the grey morning. For the first time in weeks, I could see him not as Daniel, not as the man I thought I loved, but just a man, fragile and human, trying to find his way back to something he'd lost. And yet, my chest ached in a way I hadn't expected. Because letting go didn't feel like relief, it felt like an ending I wasn't ready to name. The path was uneven beneath our boots, snow crunching with each step. Every sound echoed like it belonged to someone else, somewhere far from this quiet forest. I kept glancing at him, at the curve of his shoulders, at the way his eyes followed the tree line. He didn't speak much, but the silence between us was heavy, carrying all the words we hadn't said in weeks. The candle flickered, its light warm against the white cold. I imagined it as a small shield between us and the vast emptiness, though it barely seemed enough. I remembered the first winter night I lit this candle alone, the way it bent toward him when he wasn't there. Tonight, it stood straight, stubborn and patient, like it had finally learned to wait. He walked slower now, as if savoring each footstep, each sound of the snow. I realized he wasn't hurrying toward something. He was leaving something behind. And I understood then that letting him go didn't mean pushing him away. It meant witnessing him reclaim a life I couldn't give him. My hands tightened around the candle, feeling its warmth seep into my fingers. And for a moment, I wished the winter would stop, so I could hold on to him just a little longer. He stopped at the edge of the woods, where the trees thinned and the horizon opened into pale morning light. Snow clung to his hair, glinting in tiny crystals that seemed to catch the flame's glow. "Thank you," he said softly. Not for believing he was Daniel. Not for pretending for my sake. But for letting him feel human, even for a few nights. I nodded, unable to speak. The ache in my chest was a quiet weight, pressing me into the snow. His gaze lingered on the woods, then drifted back to me. There was something in his eyes, a faint longing, not for me, not for the life we shared, but for the fragments of himself he'd carried all these years. I wanted to reach for him, to hold on, but the candle reminded me, this was his moment. His journey. The wind swirled around us, lifting snowflakes like whispers. He stepped forward, leaving behind a trail of footprints that vanished as quickly as they were made. I followed the movement with my eyes, memorizing each step until it disappeared into the white silence. The echo of his boots faded, leaving nothing but the hush of snow settling over the world. I exhaled, though the air felt too thin, too cold. And in that breath, I felt the quiet truth. Some people are meant to pass through our lives, not stay. I walked back alone, the candle cradled in both hands, its flame steady now, calm against the darkness. The forest loomed behind me, tall and watchful, but empty. No shadow, no echo, no lingering presence. Back at the house, I set the candle in the windowsill, the glass catching the faint light of dawn. The flame burned steady, unwavering, no longer bending or flickering toward a figure that wasn't there. I lingered, watching it pulse softly in the cold, white morning. The warmth seeped into my chest, gentle and insistent, like a reminder that some endings could be quiet, even beautiful. I thought of him, the stranger who wore Daniel's face, but not his life. I thought of the nights he walked the woods, the silent moments in the house, the traces of someone trying to be loved. Was he seeking a past he had lost? Or a future I was never meant to share? The question hovered, unanswerable, as I watched the flame sway in rhythm with my own heartbeat. It was the last winter light I would see with him in mind. And somehow, that was enough. I stepped back from the window, letting the quiet fill the room. Outside, the snow continued to fall slow as ash, settling over footprints, over memories, over the spaces we'd shared. The house was still. The candle burned low, a single point of warmth in the cold, winter morning. I pressed my hand to the glass, as if touching the flame could hold both him and the past in place. But the light was stubbornly steady. It wouldn't follow anyone, wouldn't bend to grief. It simply existed. I turned away, letting the quiet settle into me. And for the first time, I could breathe. The last winter light flickered and held, and the world beyond the window waited, patient and endless, for the next story to unfold.